You mentioned Coach Dunbar. You worked for a ton of different offensive coordinators. From your time at Missouri State and your time at UNI. What was it kind of like being an offensive line coach? Through all of these different coordinators. How did you kind of have to adjust your style? Were you able to do that? I mean, you had a pretty diverse background with all the guys you had to work for.
Yeah, I mean, really the first taste I got of it is when I was playing at UNI. I was a fullback. They moved me to guard, and we ran buck sweep and trap. And so that was the first taste I got of O-line. And then I was a GA, and that's all we ran with Mookie was buck sweep and trap, and we threw it. And so then when I went to the junior college, he was McNeely was an I coach. So then I learned about power and, more man blocking schemes. We ran a lot of ISO and lead draw. So that I'll tell you, the kids will never know what coaching in a junior college is like. We had 4 coaches. I did all the laundry. I did the taping. I was the strength coach. I was the offensive line. 2 of us on offense, 2 of us on defense. And we were the academic advisors. We did everything. And so we were in the Garden City, Kansas is where we were way out. And that is wild. And it's changed. It's I don't think the young guys get to probably experience, even when they're GA, get to experience that wearing all those hats. And I don't know and we had to teach. So there was a lot of nights you'd teach your classes, go out recruiting, get back at like 2 a.m, and then get up and teach again, and then go back out. And because in Garden City, you weren't close to anything. So right by the time change, the mountain time, Wichita was 2.5 hours. And so that junior college, I mean, I learned a ton there just because you had to. And worked for McNeely. And that was a great experience because you're just kind of thrown into everything. You have to coach running backs. Sometimes you have to coach wide receivers. Sometimes you have to coach tight ends. Just kind of depended on, what we were doing in what segment of the day. And so I really learned a lot in junior college ranks. And I went from there to Southwest Missouri State, where we ran the triple, much like you'd see the academies running today. In fact, we did with Arkansas State and Georgia Southern, and we'd have clinics every year. Our 3 staffs, and that was a blast. So I was fortunate to do that. I can't think of the line coach's name. About Jesse's last year, Jesse Branch, we switched to the I. We kind of ran out of quarterbacks. We had kind of a bad string that happened circumstances. So we brought in the line coach at Ohio State, and we put in the power. And it was totally different than what we had done the previous 5 years.
I think all boys growing up, love and respect and idolize their dads, and then to think that, whoa, my dad's a football coach. Oh, that's cool. And and everybody thinks it's cool that your dad's a football coach. So especially growing up in Pittsburgh, a small town, where the university is a big part of the town, and the grills are very popular in Pittsburgh. So I couldn't think of anything better. Like you're saying, as soon as school's over, I'm running over to the weed. That's where Dad's office was, and watching practice every day. And I think that just seeing that and being around it just solidified. Yep, that's what I want to do. And it's the best way to grow up, I think. I've heard you guys tell stories about Brady, you're talking about your dad, and he'd let you draw. You'd come to him with plays in church and all that stuff.
Yep.
And just another great way to bond with your dad. I know I got two older brothers. We grew up at the facility playing, being at practice. We were equipment managers. We got to drive around the truck and throw out the bags. Of course, you could stack them up and run through them. And, and
Yep.
when it wasn't football season, we were in the weed playing hockey in the hallways, with all the HPER equipment. And, what a great way to grow up as a kid, having a dad as a football coach. So, and even here in Broken Arrow, Bodie comes home and he's excited about the Tigers, and his friends think it's cool that his dad's a football coach. So it's a pretty cool deal all around.
Coach Broyles, your dad had quite the list of guys that actually worked underneath him. Can you talk about some of those guys and maybe some of the stories you remember from some of them too? Because Pitt State was churning out some big name coaches during those years.
Yeah, I remember. I think of course, my dad. Now that I'm older and a productive member of society, we talk a lot more. Not like when you're a college kid and still living under the roof, but yeah, when I was little, there at Pitt State in the early '90s, the late '80s, you had Jerry Kill, who was came from Webb City and was a successful high school coach, and of course he was the offensive coordinator for the Gorillas when they won the national championship. And he went on, and I guess it all started with Coach Franchione, Dennis Franchione. We moved to Pittsburgh because of him. He hired Dad to be the defense coordinator, and I think he left for Southwest Texas State, which I think is now just Texas State. But so Coach Fran was there at one time, and Jerry Kill was the offense coordinator. He ended up being the head coach in Minnesota and several other places. And even Gary Patterson, who the head coach at TCU. So, those are under Coach Fran's coaching tree, and I guess my dad's, and of course, even in the MIAA, everybody wanted a Pitt State guy. For a while, I think right now at Tahlequah, I think there was a Pitt State guy, or he was a grad assistant there at Pitt State. Coach Brown at Fort Hays State, Coach Sherg at Washburn. All those guys either played for Dad or coached with him. So it is, just to be able to hear Dad tell stories about some of those guys, and it's pretty cool, Some very successful people came from Pitt State and in the coaching world.
Your dad had obviously a lot of chances where he could have moved on from Pitt State. He could have went and I believe been a defensive coordinator at some bigger schools, obviously, and probably even a head coach at a couple of bigger schools, I would assume. Has he ever talked to you about, what kind of caused him to stay at Pitt State? Because that's something that to me is really intriguing and something that you don't see a whole lot out of in the coaching community. You see a lot of guys jumping around from place to place, and very seldom do you find a guy that, is happy with where he is and doesn't get enticed by that bigger and better job, but just decides to go ahead and stick with where he's at and build a dynasty.
Right. And, one thing, I don't know how many times we heard it. Who was the guy at Tulsa that he took his dream job like three years in a row or 3 times?
Todd Graham.
There you go. Dream job. But we joke, but that was Pittsburgh State was my dad's dream job. I think he grew up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, and he wanted to be a gorilla. He got to play there, you know, GA'd there, and he got to come back and be a gorilla and be the head gorilla. So that really was his dream job. You know, some people say it, but he really did live it.